voting for him, he's a tosser.
And the people of Wakefield know that he was one bad apple.
You don't feel levelled up?
No.
I don't even want to talk about Boris Johnson.
They feel rather sorry for him, actually.
Wakefield's a small city in the north of England, but the constituency, which also includes the rolling hills around us, is home to about 70,000 people. Back in 2019, they elected Imran Khan, the Conservative candidate, on a majority of about 3,300 votes. Back in 2016, they also voted for Brexit, or at least about two-thirds of them did. Wakefield is also home to this beautiful cathedral built in the 14th century, and in the 1460s, it was the site of one of the key battles of the Wars of the Roses. Well now, 6 years on from the referendum, it's more about the Wars of the Rosettes, as the candidates and their party activists descend on the city ahead of Thursday's by-election. With voters struggling with the cost of living and their representative, Imran Ahmad Khan, in prison, this is a tough fight for the Tories. We caught up with the party's candidate, Nadeem Ahmed, on the doorstep in Muddlestown. The reason why we're having this by-election is because the previous Conservative MP was convicted of sexually assaulting a teenage boy. I mean, the Tories deserve to lose this election, don't they?
No, they don't, because Mr. Khan, for his offences, was the right things happened to him. He's in prison, which is the right place. As a teacher, a father, and as a human being, what he did was wrong. It was disgusting. And the people of Wakefield know that he was one bad apple. As you know, Harold Shipman committed suicide in Wakefield prison. He was a GP, one of the most a trusted professional like teachers and others. When we put that, when they put a vaccine in our arm, we trust what they're putting in us. Have we stopped trusting GPs? No, we still trust GPs.
The biggest issue for a lot of voters, I would imagine, is the cost of living crisis. Should the government be doing more to cut taxes and make things cheaper for people?
I'm a low tax Tory. I've always believed that more money of people's need to be spent in the pocket.
If you're a low-tax Tory, you must be pretty disappointed with Rishi Sunak. He keeps putting them up. I mean, we've got the highest tax burden in this country since the Second World War. If you get into Parliament as an MP, you're going to be standing on the backbenches telling him to put them down again.
The fact remains, under the coalition government and the successive Conservative governments, we've taken more people out of the tax burden. We don't want to be doing a Labour position where we just, we start getting endless cycles of borrowing, because somebody at some point has to pay that back.
But despite voters' apathy towards Boris Johnson's progress on levelling up, Sir Keir Starmer isn't overconfident of a victory here. In fact, Labour didn't want us to interview him, but we bumped into him by accident outside Wakefield Cathedral. A question for the Telegraph, Sir Keir. And we had a little chat. Is Wakefield the first brick to fall back to Labour in the Red Ball?
Well, I hope so, but we've got to earn every vote. Wakefield was a Labour seat for many, many years. We lost it in 2019. What we're doing now is restoring trust in the Labour Party. We hope to win it, but I know we've got to earn every vote, and that's why we've got big teams out in a very positive way in Wakefield.
How does it feel on the ground today? A man just walked past and called you a tosser.
Voting for him, he's a tosser.
Is that the general feeling?
I just spoke to Carol, who was a lifelong Labour voter until 2019. She then voted for the Conservatives, and she told me that she's now coming back to Labour because of the change that I've brought about as leader of the Labour Party, because of the change that we've put in place in the last 2 years. And that is very, very important to me, because that is evidence that the change that we've carried out in the last 2 years is beginning to restore the trust that's so needed in our politics. Thank you very much.
Thanks. What is it you want to see? What does Keir Starmer in number 10 mean for you?
I just want him to be stronger.
Be stronger than Boris Johnson, or be stronger than he's been?
I don't even want to talk about Boris Johnson.
There's one other issue here that Labour's not that keen to talk about, but voters are still going on about it 6 years after the EU referendum.
I voted for Brexit for my sins, because it's not finished, and I think we're all suffering through it.
I spoke to Chris Walsh, who is standing for Reform UK, which in 2019 was called the Brexit Party, and finished third. Chris, you're upset with Boris Johnson. There are a lot of voters we've spoken to today who are upset with Boris Johnson. There's perhaps a feeling that Wakefield went the wrong way last time in 2019. Why is that?
Well, I think they voted based upon a policy which was to make sure that Brexit was done. There was a general issue in Wakefield when Mary Cray was at the helm that she wanted to, one of the people, Remainers, that wanted to reverse Brexit. People voted overwhelmingly for Brexit, so I think they chose the Tories, let's be honest, for the first time in however many years, not based upon wanting Boris, they wanted Boris to get it done. the issue is that we go to 2016 and then the last couple of years we've had, government decisions based on a pandemic and so on. So it's maybe been overshadowed a little bit, but I think people have lost trust in the government's ability to get things done as well. And then you get the Remainers that basically want to say, it's because of Brexit and everything else, and it becomes a blame game again. And I think that adds to the mistrust in the government to actually get the job done and get done what the people of Wakefield voted for.
But you perhaps make a point, right? Is that the idea?
That's exactly the point.
Well, from the red wall to the blue wall. On Thursday, there'll also be a by-election in Tiverton and Honiton, in Devon. It's happening because the previous MP, Neil Parish, resigned after being caught watching pornography in the House of Commons chamber. Here, voters are deciding whether to keep backing the Tories, as they've done for decades, or to try something else. The Lib Dems reckon it's part of a blue wall of wavering Tory seats in the south of England that might be about to turn yellow. But what's clear is that voters here have a problem with the man in number 10. Richard Foord, a former soldier, is the man the Lib Dems think could swing more than 10,000 Tory voters over to them. The party is throwing everything at this seat, and the quiet country lanes of the Devon countryside are swarming with activists. Richard, thanks so much for chatting to us. We've just spoken to some voters here. We are right out in the sticks. I mean, if you were to become an MP next week and you sit in the House of Commons, what is the future of the Lib Dems? What actually is the national message to people? Or are you not just basically a party that campaigns on whatever people are bothered about at the time?
I'm absolutely campaigning on national issues in this by-election. To give one example, the cost of living crisis is really hurting people throughout the United Kingdom, and what we in the Liberal Democrats are proposing is a VAT cut of 2.5%. That would put £600 back into people's pockets, and the government could do this immediately to help ease the cost of living crisis.
If you were to overturn it, it would be the biggest overturning of a majority in the by-election history. Do you think you can do it?
It's tough. It's tough in the sense that a 24,000 majority is bigger even than Liverpool Wavertree in 1935. But what I am hearing, taking each door as it comes, is that there's a lot of frustration out there with the Johnson government, and a lot of people are switching to the Liberal Democrats at this time.
The Lib Dems think perhaps that they might be able to swap this constituency over. They think a 24,000 majority could be out the door, and they might.
I don't think the Lib Dems have done their numbers very well. We've got 75,000 voters here. The majority of whom are over the age of 65. By the time postal votes open, the Tory has been elected. It's as simple as that.
The government's strategy, the government's slogan at least, is levelling up. Is there a feeling perhaps that the South could do with levelling up too?
The South West has long been ignored except for second homes. We're a beautiful part of the country, as you can see looking around. It's a fabulous place to live and a very safe environment to bring up children, which is why we stayed here. But actually, in terms of general investment, our access to the rest of the country is pretty much zero. Our train station is 7 miles away. It costs £250 for a day ticket to London and back.
Over in the blue camp, the Tories have selected Helen Hurford, a former school teacher. She's keen to keep talking about local politics, but on the doorstep, it's the national issues that dominate. If you were to win this by-election next week, you'd become a Conservative Member of Parliament. You're joining a party which is pretty unpopular at the moment in a lot of places, a lot of scandals. And don't you feel a bit embarrassed to be a Conservative at the moment?
No, not at all. It's the only party that has aspirations. It's the only party that I can see that is encouraging people to grow and invest in themselves. And that's being a teacher. That's what I always taught the children in my schools. And that's what I think a Conservative represents.
I mean, to a lot of voters in this country, the moment Conservatives represent people who are breaking the lockdown rules that they themselves have set. You're a teacher, you teach the kids the rules, right? And then they break them. Those kids would expect to be punished for it. And, there are many who would say that the government deserves to be electorally punished for what happened over the lockdown.
There has been the Sue Gray report. I wasn't impressed either by the lockdown parties. Like you say, I'm a head teacher, I am one for the rules. I think our Prime Minister has made the big calls, and he's made some really difficult calls. So when we have big decisions, he is making the right calls.
Just quickly on Neil Parish, what was your reaction when you heard the news that Neil Parish had been found watching pornography in the House of Commons chamber?
Just like everybody else, I was very surprised. But, he admitted what he did was wrong. It was wrong. He resigned. That was appropriate.
And what have voters been saying about that when you've been speaking to them about it on the doors?
Actually, a lot of our voters here were very fond of Mr Parish. He did do well. They feel rather sorry for him, actually. But, as I remind them, I'm here now, and I'm the one that's wanted to represent Tiverton and Honiton.
Why do they feel sorry for him?
I don't know. You have to ask them.
Well, we did. And this is what they had to say. Did you hear about the resignation of the MP for here before, Neil Parish?
Yeah, you see, that's what I mean. Who do you trust?
It's not acceptable to do that in Parliament.
I think they need to pull their finger out.
They do
As you
anyway.
put it, in any case, they need a squid up their backsides, if you'll excuse the expression.
This is your opportunity.
In some ways, the constituencies of Wakefield and Tiverton and Honiton couldn't be more different. One is a great northern city in Britain's industrial heartland, surrounded by former pit villages and chock full of families who have voted for Labour for decades. The other is a picture postcard of England's bucolic rural south, producing Tory majority after Tory majority. But they've got two things in common. Their Conservative MPs have disgraced themselves, and the voters are fed up with Boris Johnson. This Thursday, both constituencies look set to signal that the glimmer of election-winning spirit that has surrounded the Prime Minister throughout his career might just be wearing off.